Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for April 9th, 2021. I'm Benji Fisher moderating the meeting, and also here are Laura Yaskola, Aaron McHale, Gaurav Malawat, and Ben Mullins. And Ben, take it away.
All right. So this is, issue 2377543, and looks like this is about 6.5 years old at this point, and it's for adding an add item to the toolbar, something that has been reported as a UX problem with a lot of people. I just stumbled upon this issue today, this morning, and while I was looking through it, I noticed that it seemed to get kind of jammed regarding where the link should go, and or if pardon me, I'm going to step back. Either having it a single destination, and if it was a single destination, that should be a customized page, or the menu functionality should be greatly expanded where you could choose any type of content to add. It looks like throughout the issue that option was essentially rejected because of the potential length of it. And so there was a lot of complications regarding where the add content link would go. And so I wanted to bring to you a suggestion that would be one that I think would improve things, would not create any backwards compatible issues. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be a significant improvement. And so my thought was to have it go to the node add page, the existing one. So the discussion about creating a new route is no longer an issue. And then there would be a query argument added to the URL, and we'd use Drupal's JavaScript messaging system to provide links to add content of other entity types. So it would essentially be, you'd be brought to a page like this, but it would have a query argument at the end of it, indicating that it came from the add content destination. And Drupal's messaging system would simply say, if you're interested in adding something other than a node, and you'd get a message that says add media, add whatever other entities that user has access to. And this has the benefit of not setting anything in stone. It's not the type of change that we'd have to reckon with later if we wanted to make it a better experience, but at the same time, it would significantly improve the experience for a lot of users. So I just wanted to bring that idea and discuss it. That's me.
So before I forget, let me just mention that Thomas Howell joined us. Thank you.
Oh, great. If you don't mind, I'll say something on this because I don't remember if this came up at a meeting as I said, this is quite an old issue now. I don't remember if we looked at this before, but I've certainly seen this issue and have put some thought into this in the past. It is, I think this is a really important one because also similar to the issue that we looked at a couple of weeks back, where the administrative toolbar and the sort of defaults layout of all the different items that tend to appear in the administrative menu and toolbar is not the most optimal if you're just like a content creator or a content editor. Your experience tends to have things arbitrarily scattered across like items like configuration and structure and content. So I think this is quite an important issue. My feeling was similar to yourself in that I think when we talk about adding something, like if you look at media, for instance, when media is very well scoped in that you're adding media, you know that you're going to, like, if you want to upload an image or a video or something, you know, like, okay, I'm going to add a piece of media here, and then you use the media library to interact with that. The same with kind of taxonomy, like, okay, I'm going to add taxonomy, or I'm going to add a term. So those things are pretty well defined. Like the node module is this sort of Drupal oddity in that it provides these things. Like nobody ever thinks, oh, I'm going to go add a node. They think I'm going to go add an article, or I'm going to go add a basic page. And that's typically how sites are structured. Like a site might have a forum post node or an event node or something. So I think this sort of hybrid approach of having whatever this add link does, whether it brings up another menu on the toolbar, or whether it goes directly to a page like this, I think is a really solid approach in saying for the node module, we'll just display all the different content types, but then other modules like media or taxonomy would inject like just a single link for, add media or add taxonomy. So that's where I kind of sit on this, and so broadly kind of agree with what you were saying there.
Great. Okay.
So I have a very minor, slightly different opinion on one thing. One of the challenges that I've experienced over the years as a site builder is that the node paradigm of Drupal isn't just page and those types of items, because it treats content in a very quantized unit basis, so that there are contrib modules like paragraphs and other things that can do some really strange things depending on how people want to build their sites. And so the term content is always very, very loaded. And I know we've gone to great lengths to try and simplify things, but I wanted just to bring that forward so that we're at least thinking about that when we review these things, because not every site out there is going to treat each node as if it is its own potential URL. In many instances, it's used as much smaller units within the greater whole.
I think on that note, like Drupal 8 and 9, and okay, we can even say Drupal 10 now, has with the entity system maturing has gotten a lot better at, for instance, like paragraphs are under the hood. It has its own paragraph entity type, so it's like separated out from the node entity type. So I think we'd have to be clear in this about, as you were saying, like obviously you wouldn't want add paragraph, like that wouldn't make sense. So I think it's about whatever's on here makes sense in the context.
Correct. And that's all I wanted to make certain, that we didn't just assume. And the danger with content is, prior to the modernization of terminology that I think we introduced with 7, maybe it was 8, I had always thought of media as content as well. I think of taxonomy as content as well. And so this page, when we talk about adding something, I build glossary sites, and I use taxonomy within those contexts of the glossary site. Those are each taxonomy term is its own page from I guess a more traditional HTML perspective. Like it's its own URL, and I want people to think of it as its own quantized unit of information. It's a definition of a term, like a dictionary. So when I see content, this really still is only in a very simple use case. So if we're doing anything to extend this or to make it more inclusive, it just gets, I can see why this is a stuck issue, because what do you do in all those other instances? Like, it would be great if there was a content page that brought together all content generation that a content generator would care about. And we've talked about like the roles before, when we've talked about the like content editor versus the content manager, et cetera. And so this kind of falls into that same bucket. Like, what could we do to improve the user experience when you have all of these content things, and that complexity gets really hidden in an ungood way when you click on add item or add content and it's just taking you here.
Yes. While you're talking about that, yeah, I mean, I was thinking through how my proposed approach could potentially conflict with what you're looking to do, and what I would envision is so my approach would be to begin with just having a conditional JavaScript message that says, if you're looking to add taxonomy, media, and so on, it's just a JavaScript message. But what would be ideal in my mind is then to have a follow-up issue. So we'd get the benefit of the add content button, but we already have a secondary tab system. And currently, if you go to content, there's tabs that allow you to view all the different content. So were we to do the same on add content, it would default to Node because that's the most common use case still. But then there'd simply be tabs, taxonomy, and so on.
That would be awesome. Like, I think then the page would seem more structurally holistic to me, and it would work for everyone in a larger number of contexts. So, and I agree. I think this sounds good. I just want to make certain that we were thinking about those things in case during testing, because a lot of the testing we do is against kind of like, I guess the lowest common denominator build sites, something that's very like the umami test site, and we just test that situation. But once you get into real world use cases, I see lots and lots of things where it's a lot more than just that. If it's not a brochure-aware site, you're going to see a lot more complexity, and I just want to make certain that the messaging makes sense, and I just want us thinking about that when we evaluate.
Absolutely.
I have a couple of points. The first is, I don't see why JavaScript should be involved here, why we should get different behavior on this page depending on how we get here, which link we press. That seems to me like a UX problem by itself. Why not just always add information to this page? So that's my first point. The second is sort of in response to some of the things that Thomas said, that this is very site specific, and that Thomas may have a site where he wants taxonomy to appear on this page or as a tab on this page, but other sites might view taxonomy differently, and it would be very strange for them to have this. So media is something that would be useful to have here. Some sites might want custom blocks to be a tab on this page. So I would like to have a way to add tabs to this page that is configurable by the site admin. So have a configuration page somewhere where you can say, I want taxonomy to appear as a tab on the add content page, and I want this to be the label of that tab. I want media, I want whatever else, blocks. And I guess any content entity type can be selected.
I think this sounds super awesome, and I 100% agree. In fact, I would even advocate for edge. It's not I think it's a very major edge case like taxonomy, but if you had that kind of configuration page, you could have them available, but not configured on by default. We could even have just this page as the only default thing that was there, or maybe this in media. But if you made it kind of configurably extensible that way, you could go with the most common use case so that we aren't deviating from what people are used to, but making the addition of these things extremely simple for the site builder would be excellent. I don't know, is it possible to consider that configuration page in some way, shape, or form, either informing or being informed by the content view link or view page, so that so that you would actually have continuity between when you clicked to view your content and when you clicked to add your content, you might be able to see things that looked similar. I don't know if that makes sense, but to me, that means that you'd be using a common paradigm for your content generators, and they would be like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Like, this is how I add. And you can even have a link on each of these pages to directly go to the view, to like, you can have add content and the link to view content, and on view content, you can have a link to the add content, and you create that kind of parallel experience. I don't know if it makes sense.
Similarly, as you were both talking, I was thinking, well, I used the example of media earlier, but actually, the whole thing about this being very specific to a site is important, because it made me realize that let's consider a hypothetical example of, like, a site like Imager, where it's very image focused. Like, on a kind of site like that, where it's very focused on a particular kind of media, you might want to be able to configure this so that instead of an add media link, it isn't like an add image link, and drill down further. So I think there's definitely a strong argument there of this whatever happens here has to be configurable so that it represents what the site's purpose is. I'll throw something out that all of the administrative pages we have right now, like under manage, or the majority of them, like structure and configuration and all that, it's all just based on the menu system. So there's nothing stopping the implementation of this literally just being a menu that has all of these links. And then that way you get the configuration aspect where a site administrator could go in and configure this menu structure to be exactly the way they want. But then on the other hand, that's not a simple, like, click a bunch of, or go into one. That's not going to give you one configuration screen, that's like says select what kinds of items you want to be on the ad page. But I guess on the other hand, it provides quite a level of flexibility in that sense.
So something that I wanted to say is that, like, first of all, I think I don't have anything against the idea of making changes to the ad content page here. I think that could potentially work as one solution, but just like going back to the idea where you would have sort of all of the entity types and bundles available to the menu, so you wouldn't have to navigate to kind of one page in between the form. And I was wondering if we could try to group the bundles per entity type, because you shouldn't have that many entity types in total, presumably. And then you could toggle them open and closed based on what you actually want to add. And sort of similar to what we have here on the toolbar that you have open right now on the vertical mode. Like, for example, the configuration, you can fit quite a few items under that.
I believe that was discussed somewhere in the issue too, where an approach like that was mentioned, and then there was concerns about that unless there was a way to enforce the vertical, having it be positioned vertically.
And I'm realizing a second issue is that the URL for ad content is specifically node ad, which may be why this is only content types that's visible on this link, because if we changed the purpose, unless each of the tabs or each of the sections vertically or like horizontal or vertical space, if each of those had a different URL, but I could see why this page is only these things now. I didn't realize, I was thinking it was more along the lines of d9.test /en/admin/content add or something like that. But because it says node, I'm guessing there's backwards compatibility issues, as well as the fact that it is a specific form of content. It is not media. It is just nodes.
Right. Yes. And that was one of the things discussed. I believe there were several comments regarding what the URL would be for this this new page that featured everything. And then there were concerns that it might be something that was in use by other by an existing site. And yeah, so that opened up additional complications. I guess one thing that I wanted to step back a little bit regarding why I brought up the solution I did, which was I think that there's a lot of good ideas discussed. And I guess what I'm specifically looking for is what could we get away with in order to provide users this button, even if there are going to be future modifications made to improve the experience. And that's one of the reasons I thought just adding a message there, because one of the biggest concerns was there's different kinds of content to add. And while it isn't the most elegant solution, it would give users an easy means of accessing the ability to add what is typically not the most common kinds of things they'd want to add. So I don't think it would hurt the experience, but it would give people that button. So I'm just wondering, out of all the things discussed so far, what would be must-haves to simply have a button there that routes people to the node add form versus things that could be tackled in a follow-up issue?
I'm going to say again, I think that's a bad user experience. That you have one way of navigating to this page that gives you what we see now, and another way to navigate to the same page that shows us something different. I think that's confusing.
We could have the message there. It could always be there. So, because I mean, currently, right, it also says add content here, and nodes are not mentioned. So that is that could be considered a UX challenge in its own right. So by adding the button, it would be providing a quicker way to access something that's commonly accessed. But that destination is not one that's free of problems. So would it be necessary to completely rethink how the whole ad content experience works in order to have a button that gets people there faster?
I think if we're duplicating an existing button elsewhere in the UI, that doesn't necessarily degrade things, but I don't know if I would add any extra messaging about other content if it doesn't exist in the other contexts, like the button that you just showed. I would go for commonality, at least for Drupal 8 and Drupal 9. I think with Drupal 10, it would make sense to open up one or more follow-up issues to address multiple things that we've talked about. I'd put the URL as one, for instance, because for me, it causes cognitive dissonance between node add and add content. And so I'd love to fix that, but I don't think that's something you want to touch in any existing sites. I think that's a really good point. But in Drupal 10, I feel like you could argue for an overall improvement in making more significant changes to how things work. But that I think that would actually require multiple follow-up issues, because otherwise we can become stuck on any one aspect. And while they're interrelated, I don't think they're necessarily fully interdependent. And in the short term, I think adding the button should be okay. But for Drupal 8, like, so for full backwards compatibility, I would avoid anything that does a whole lot of stuff and keep it very simple to add the button because it works the way it works that way elsewhere in the UI. And if we want to add more contextual information to this page, we can add it to this page to point to other things or to make people aware that this is the only stuff you do on this page. And then we don't even have to worry about the JavaScript, and we can keep it very, very simple and light and get this issue closed and the improvement in.
Okay, so yeah, you're saying some added information would be beneficial, but it should be consistent and not based on how it was accessed. Is that correct?
That is exactly correct. That's what I heard Benji say, and I agree with Benji.
Great, I like it too.
I think there's something I said back at the start of the discussion was about the issue that I think it was a couple of weeks ago that was brought up around it was almost attempting to have different toolbar experiences depending on the roles that you have. So for instance, if you're a content editor, the items and the things you need to get to are very different from if you are a site administrator. And historically, the entire administrative experience has been focused around that top-down approach of what does the administrator need to see, and considering, in the context of everything, but not in the context of like, if you're a content editor and you only have like 5 administrative pages, including the content page, then you don't, like, arguably you don't need to see the configuration link, you don't need the structure link, you just need the things that you want to get to. So I think there's definitely a wider discussion that around, like, how do we provide a navigation experience that works for people in the right context? And I think this is part of that discussion.
In a sense, that sounds a bit persona driven. So there's an intersection between the permission set. Like, I guess historically we've assumed that permission sets were personas. And I'm kind of hearing that there may be a difference. It's to more plainly describe it, administrative is the full set of all available options. So anyone who has less than administrative access has, it's subtracted from that full set. So you get some subset of what the admin has. So there's no real attention paid to the persona of the user and what they want to have access to, or what is the priority for the best experience. It's just, if you're an admin, here's 30 choices. If you're a sub-admin, here's 20 choices. If you're a content generator, here's 10 choices. If you're just a site visitor, here's 2 choices. And are you saying that you think we need something a little more configurable or dynamic that is responsive to what somebody wants to be doing in the site, more so than just what they have permission to do in the site?
I think so. And I think, I actually think the first example of that happening was way back when the shortcuts module was introduced. But then that was kind of nothing has fundamentally really changed since the toolbar and the shortcuts module. Because, like, if you look at the shortcuts module, it adds a shortcuts button to the toolbar that is configurable for every single user. Yeah, I think there is there's another thing around that was brought up earlier around what the context of the site is. Like, if it's a very content heavy site, but I'm working on a project right now that's using Drupal commerce, and that's very commerce heavy, and that's very different from a content heavy site. So the administrative toolbar and experience on that site is very different, or is going to end up being very different from a traditional Drupal site. But we're kind of straying into really vague kind of discussions around the toolbar at this point, I think.
Ben, do you have what you need? Not to disregard you, Aaron. I think those are really cool points. I just want to make certain that we've got what Ben needs, and then in terms of what you're talking about, like, in my mind, I envision a new contrib module that to start off with that introduces personas. And again, this is just using the language I'm thinking. And it creates shortcut sets that are configurable based upon the persona of the person coming in. And rather than shortcuts being a collection of favorites, it's maybe shortcuts gets replaced with something that is like, these are truly the shortcuts for the type of person you are, or what it is that you want to do in the site. That would be the first place I would start, just to start at least prototyping what that behavior would look like in a concrete way moving forward. And if you can figure out what works and what doesn't, then we can talk about how to incorporate it more permanently in the toolbar, because it sounds like a long-term improvement to the toolbar experience.
But
Yeah,
yes,
actually,
yeah,
no,
you
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh,
No,
I was
you
just saying I
go
have
ahead.
what I need, so I'm gonna stop sharing, but I would gladly continue this conversation. It's great.
Yeah, I was just going to add actually that there is a module that I've been looking at for that same project called what is it called? Toolbar Menu, and it facilitates putting arbitrary menus onto the toolbar as like extra buttons. And actually, when you were sharing your screen there, Ben, yours was a perfect example of, I don't know what you've got in your toolbar, but there's like extra buttons. I think, is that like the Pattern Lab UI module or something? That's something that's added those extra buttons. But essentially, the toolbar menu module allows you to say, I want these additional menus on the toolbar, and in addition to like the manage menu, and you can reorder them. And so I think there's something there about being able to, yeah, about maybe basing it off of a module like that. But yeah, definitely, I don't know about this specific issue, but yeah, we'd probably figure something out.
Does that module let you completely replace what appears in the toolbar, or does it just add to the existing toolbar?
It doesn't. No, so it just adds existence. It doesn't remove any of the what's there by default. It just lets you add existing, like effectively. Because if you think about it, the manage button is effectively just the administration menu. So it's essentially allowing you to add menus in addition to the administration menu as like top level buttons. And I think the reason that's really relevant is because what I can envision is having, instead of having just a single administration menu that has everything, going back to those personas, you have like a content creation menu, and that has items on there that are and is structured in a way that is specifically designed for content creation.
I'd be interested in seeing a issue on this, because I agree it would be a nice improvement, and I could see it applying to a lot of larger site builds. My biggest concern is the toolbar already gets super busy, and I'd be afraid that if by default you started with way too much stuff going on up there, you're just going to create a lot of like noise for users. But done right, I think it would be a strong improvement in making that flexible for users.
Okay, and Aaron shared in the Zoom chat the menu he's been talking about, toolbar menu. And I see Jamie Fallon has joined us. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I guess we no longer have up on the screen the issue we were talking about. If someone would share that in the chat, I could open it up. But maybe we're done talking about that issue. Any further comments? Okay, yeah, it's complicated problem, and we've definitely talked about it before in these meetings, and it would be nice to have some incremental progress here.
Absolutely.
Are there any other issues people would like to bring up? I guess there was one thing mentioned. I've set up my site with the patch applied for this, but I'm not entirely sure how to test it. But this was mentioned in the UX channel, I think. The issue number is 3056258. No redirection to vocabulary overview page after create a new term. And I guess the idea is that if you add a vocabulary, you go to the overview page for that vocabulary and click add term, then the expectation is you would return to that overview page when you finished adding a term. The current behavior is that you stay on the add term page so that you can add another term. So let's just test this out with the patch applied. So structure, taxonomy, and let's see, yes, this is the overview page. And if I add term, then I think on a stock Drupal site, I would go back to the page to add another term. And with this patch applied,
Brilliant.
well, that's a problem. So this is the problem with not doing any preparation before presenting to the group. But the idea is we would come back here.
I'm curious to see what the behavior is for things like other entities. So like if you're adding a menu, a custom menu item, or obviously adding a node, I'm just thinking, because this is a pattern that's not specific to taxonomy. So if we can like if we determine there's a problem and it just so happens to exist in like custom menu items, then we could probably fix it there as well.
I think I looked at this, although maybe I'm confusing with something else, but it's all over the place. I don't think there's a consistent pattern in Drupal.
Would one be defined and kind of a small scale, larger effort be made to unify, or is that just unnecessary work?
I think that's the sort of thing we should really do user testing if we want to come up with the right answer.
Absolutely agree. But then for me, the question becomes, do we want to work on this specific issue, or is there like a parent issue that needs to do that usability testing before we pick one way of doing things?
Yeah,
Or
go ahead.
Oh no, I want to yield the floor.
Yeah, and I guess it's sort of a cop out to say we need to do usability testing. Maybe we could get a start by at least opening an issue and listing out the current behaviors so that we at least have some idea of what the options are and just how inconsistent it is. Yeah, just looking at the issue now, there's a related issue. Provide an optional destination parameter for local actions, but that doesn't seem like the sort of parent issue you are asking about.
Right. And I don't even know if it really is an issue. I seem to recall things like this oddity, things where I would have expected something to behave the way you're kind of describing, not always occurring. And to me, it sounds like that should be a described pattern, and we should say, hey, every time, because it sort of alludes to the issue you brought up earlier with the JavaScript suggestion from Ben, like having two different behaviors, like it's just confusing sometimes when that happens. That's about it.
Yeah, the reason I sort of suspect that this behavior is not consistent is from my experience of building custom content entity types, in that this is like a one-line piece of code to do the redirection in the form submission function on like each, but it's up to each form to do it. If the form doesn't do it, Drupal is just like, well, here's the form again. And in fact, it doesn't even give you, by like, if you just take a stock entity form, I don't even think it will get, I think you have to, every like entity form has to provide the confirmation submission message as well. So I think we're consistently doing that at least, but the reader, I suspect the redirect behavior perhaps may be, this was the reason I thought it might be inconsistent. I was curious because like it's up to every entity form to do that redirection, I believe.
Got it. And so that's not something, I mean, this may not even be worthy of an issue because it's just it sounds like it's the net result of people not consistently providing all of the contextual information necessary to have the behavior work well. And there really,
Yeah.
there's not a way to do that. Like we can't force someone to do that when they build something.
Yeah,
I
let me
think
just point
in
out
core
how
we
it's
could
implemented. There's a destination parameter added. And you can see those buggy quotes there.
Yeah, that might actually I think that's handled by forms inherently, so that might be one of those cases where actually it's the destination parameter results in a redirect happening, but I'm not sure actually now. So I guess for this issue, do we think the proposed resolution, I guess, is a sensible one?
Yes, for this issue, I think it sounds reasonable. As long as it's working and doesn't throw the quotes in, but yes.
And then there's this second comment under the proposed resolution that the redirect does not happen when a user visits the term add form route directly. And
Yeah, that'll be a result, that missing redirect. I would assume that missing redirect in the form submission, as I previously mentioned.
I think all that's saying is that if you somehow navigate to this page without the destination parameter, then you get the old behavior. That's funny. Well, I think there are problems with this. I also think that the current behavior is sometimes useful. That there are cases when you're setting up a new site where you want to add a dozen terms to your vocabulary, and having it go back to the overview page each time just makes it more work. So
actually, I'm just noting that the issue's talking about the also in the line your cursor is over there, Benji, it's saying the vocabulary page. So you were adding terms before, but if you go and what if you go and try and add I think the patch would probably affect the actual vocabulary add page, not so much the term add page, it looks like.
Oh, you think so?
Oh, it does say term though, but it'd be interesting to test that as well.
So if I go to taxonomy, is it add vocabulary? Da, 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 da.
So yeah, that took you to the term, the list page for the new vocabulary. I think that's a sensible behavior, because then the next assumption would be you probably want to add a term to the vocabulary. It's great.
That's the same behaviors for the existing vocabulary.
Yeah.
So I guess the intention of the issue is not very well reflected in the current patch. But do we think that we do we agree that if you're looking at the overview page, the list terms page of a vocabulary, that after adding a term that we want to return here? Do we want to lose the option of adding a term and then adding another term?
I think it sounds like a good incremental step. I have a lot of opinions when it comes to how taxonomies work, period. It needs a lot of improvement. I think this is, I wouldn't make it more complex than what we're looking at right now. Let's get something in there, because it's pretty, it's been ignored for a long time. So I'd love to just see some incremental improvement.
But I don't think it's an improvement necessarily.
Really?
So sorry, the fact it goes to a page not found is really throwing me. Can you go back to can you click on the add term button again?
Okay.
Okay, so we get the primary button is save, and save would, so the idea is it would take you then back to the page we were just on. That's the idea of the issue. Is that right?
Yes. I think I know where you're going.
What I'm thinking is I almost want to be like, should we have a secondary button that's like save and add another?
Yes, I would love that. I just wasn't going to suggest it.
Forgive me for being so bold.
One of the things I like about the behavior about going back to the list is like, if you have a really long list of terms, so let's just say you've got 2,000 terms, it would be really nice that when it went back, it would say added, and you would be able to see the term that you added to the, like, there's just a lot of quality life improvements that you see in other tools, so software as a service out there, that we just don't have. Like, so there's no indication of what you've done. There's no, and having a choice in the behavior where either you continually add terms here, or yeah, I added it, I now want to go back because now I want to edit another term, or I want to see that term that I've added in the context of my total list. In a perfect world, it would actually go to wherever in your list of terms that term was added, so that you would see it. Like, something I've seen happen before is people will add desserts and then misspell it and have a couple of different versions of the same word, and they don't have the context after having added the term that they've added like they've duplicated desserts, or they've added desserts with DESERTS. And
Desserts.
having, yeah, exactly. And just from a usability perspective, when you're managing many taxonomies, it would just be nice to have those things work well out of the box, because it just doesn't work well the way it is. But I think just if you guys don't think this improves things, then I'm going to shut up. It is nice to add a term and come back here. I agree, having a second button that said save and add again or whatever, that would be great, because then you have a choice in behaviors. You can stay and add 30 terms from that page, et cetera, et cetera.
Hey, why doesn't the button say create? And now I'm just getting nitpicky.
I think it's always said add tag since back in the day.
No, oh no, I meant on the form. It's this, like, instead of saying save as the primary button on the add form, because then you'd be like create and add another would.
Okay, and as long as we're here, do we think a secondary button is the right answer, or another checkbox?
It's an action, and we have the pattern in media, don't we, where we have 2 buttons?
Ooh,
Yes, although
yeah,
that's kind of
media's-
complicated.
Right. Oh, it's much more complicated. I'm just, that would be, I would look to how media does it, and I'd probably do it like media.
That's a good idea. Yeah, for if there's a pattern already established there, let's keep consistent with that.
Okay, I think I can add a comment to this issue. I'll point out that the current patch is buggy and suggest that rather than changing the behavior for everyone, a better solution would be to add a secondary button. And then which should be the primary? Should I guess one argument is that for backwards compatibility, the current behavior should be the primary, but
Yeah, that would actually make a lot of sense. But you could even start with that one. It would be create and add another, and the second one would be create and go back or whatever. But yeah, I would look at media. That's the only counter argument to maintaining backwards compatibility would be wanting to make certain that it was that we can establish or use an established pattern.
okay. Okay, I think this is a good stopping place. And next week, of course, is DrupalCon, so I think we will skip the usability meeting. The Slack bot will send out a reminder. I'll try to say no when that happens. And thanks all for joining the meeting, and hope to see some of you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Benji. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, bye.